Hey, welcome to Socialism for All. This file is being recorded for the November 2021 edition of Socialism for All, and it's an audiobook and discussion of The Imperialist Aggressors Can Never Enslave the Heroic Vietnamese People from 1952 by Ho Chi Minh. If you like this video, please click like and subscribe, and consider supporting on Patreon at patreon.com/socialismforall. So, this file was written in January 1952. It was first published in the review For a Lasting Peace for a People's Democracy on April 4, 1952, under the pen name Din. The source is the Selected Works of Ho Chi Minh, Volume 3. Publisher is Foreign Languages Publishing House. Transcription and markup by Roland Ferguson and Christian Liebel. The online version is at the Ho Chi Minh Internet Archive at the Marxists Internet Archive, marxists.org, as of 2003. Thanks as usual to the Marxists Internet Archive for hosting this and thousands of other free Marxist texts. Please go check them out. And in fact, we're going to begin this file, the first of the Ho Chi Minh audiobooks that we have recorded, with the MIA biography of Ho Chi Minh. Ho Chi Minh, real name Nguyen Tat Tan, lived 1890 to 1969, was a Vietnamese communist leader and the principal force behind the Vietnamese struggle against French colonial rule. Ho was born on May 19, 1890, in the village of Kim Lien, Annam, central Vietnam, the son of an official who had resigned in protest against French domination of his country. Comment from me: basically, the French colonized this part of Southeast Asia in about the 1880s or so. They had Cambodia, Laos, Vietnam under their control, and they exploited them for rice and rubber and whatever else they could get. Continuing with the biography. Ho attended school in Hue and then briefly taught at a private school in Phan Thiet. In 1911, he was employed as a cook on a French steamship liner and thereafter worked in London and Paris. After World War I, using the pseudonym Nguyen A. Quoc, Nguyen the Patriot, Ho engaged in radical activities and was in the founding group of the French Communist Party. He was summoned to Moscow for training, and in late 1924, he was sent to Canton, China, where he organized a revolutionary movement among Vietnamese exiles. He was forced to leave China when local authorities cracked down on communist activities. Comment, this is still well before the Chinese Revolution. But he returned in 1930 to found the Indo-Chinese Communist Party, ICP. Comment, this whole area was known as French Indochina at that time. He stayed in Hong Kong as representative of the Communist International. In June 1931, Ho was arrested there by British police and remained in prison until his release in 1933. He then made his way back to the Soviet Union, where he reportedly spent several years recovering from tuberculosis. In 1938, he returned to China and served as an advisor with Chinese Communist Armed Forces. When Japan occupied Vietnam in 1941, he resumed contact with ICP leaders and helped to found a new, communist-dominated independence movement, popularly known as the Viet Minh, that fought the Japanese. In August 1945, when Japan surrendered, the Viet Minh seized power and proclaimed the Democratic Republic of Vietnam, DRV, in Hanoi. Ho Chi Minh, now known by his final and best-known pseudonym, which means the Enlightener, became president. The French were unwilling to grant independence to their colonial subjects, and in late 1946, war broke out. For 8 years, Viet Minh guerrillas fought French troops in the mountains and rice paddies of Vietnam, finally defeating them in the decisive Battle of Dien Bien Phu in 1945. Ho, however, was deprived of his victory. Subsequent negotiations at Geneva divided the country, with only the north assigned to the Viet Minh. The DRV, with Ho still president, now devoted its efforts to constructing a communist society in North Vietnam. In the early 1960s, however, conflict resumed in the south, where communist-led guerrillas mounted an insurgency against the U.S.-supported regime in Saigon. So comment here, after World War II, and this is one of the really good things when imperialist countries fight with each other, is the French were so badly weakened that they were unable to hang on to their colonies as strongly. So that's part of, how the Vietnamese were able to, win independence, was the French were distracted, basically just trying to hold on to their own, French territory and rebuild after World War II, and they had to loosen their grip and eventually lost their grip on this former colony. I mean, this is a pattern that we can see after World War I. Of course, Russia went socialist, and the USSR was founded shortly thereafter. Also, in the wake of World War I, Italy and Germany had sort of near misses with revolution, and there were other short-lived revolutions, such as in Romania, but it really was after World War II that we saw an explosion in Eastern Europe and Korea and so on. It is good when imperialists fight and hurt each other, because the people who they're oppressing then often get a chance to breathe and sometimes to completely break away from their control. Now, one of the problems here, as we can see in the case of Vietnam, is that the United States emerged virtually untouched from World War II, and the United States attempted to pick up where the European colonial imperialists had left off, and they tried, for example, to pick up Vietnam. And a long, bloody war full of atrocities resulted, which virtually everyone, every intellectual in the U.S. denounced as being a Nazi war. I mean, the United States had pretty much picked up, where some of their quote-unquote enemies had left off in terms of imperialism. Anyway, back to the biography here. Ho, now in poor health, was reduced to a largely ceremonial role while policy was shaped by others. On September 3, 1969, he died in Hanoi of heart failure. In his honor, after the communist conquest of the South in 1975, Saigon was renamed Ho Chi Minh City. Ho Chi Minh was not only the founder of Vietnamese communism, he was the very soul of the revolution and of Vietnam's struggle for independence. His personal qualities of simplicity, integrity, and determination were widely admired, not only within Vietnam, but elsewhere as well. So that's the end of the biography. Now let's get into the text. The imperialist aggressors can never enslave the heroic Vietnamese people. I avail myself of the short New Year holiday to write these lines. More fortunate than other peoples, we, the Vietnamese people, like our friends, the Chinese and the Korean peoples, enjoy 2 New Year festivals every year. One New Year Day is celebrated according to the Gregorian calendar and falls on the 1st of January. On that day, which is the official New Year Day, only government offices send greetings to one another. Another New Year Day, the Tet, is observed according to the lunar calendar, and this year falls on a day of the closing week of January. This traditional New Year Day, celebrated by the people, usually lasts from 3 to 7 days in peacetime. In our country, spring begins in the first days of January. At present, a splendid springtime prevails everywhere. The radiant sunbeams bring with them a merry and healthy life. Like an immense green carpet, the young rice plants cover the fields, heralding a coming bumper harvest. The birds warble merrily in evergreen bushes. Here, winter lasts only a few days, and rarely the thermometer falls to 10 degrees Celsius above zero. As far as snow is concerned, generally speaking, it's unknown for all of our people. Before and during the Tet Festival, pictures and greetings written on red paper could be seen stuck at entrance doors of palaces as well as tiny thatched huts. Today, these greetings and pictures are replaced by slogans urging struggle and labor, such as intensify the emulation movement for armed struggle, production, and economic development. The war of resistance will win. Combat bureaucracy, corruption, and waste. And the national construction will certainly be crowned with success. During the Tet Festival, people are clad in their most beautiful garments. In every family, the most delicious foods are prepared. Religious services are performed in front of the ancestral altars. Visits are paid between kith and kin to exchange greetings. Grown-ups give gifts to children, civilians send presents to soldiers. In short, it can be said that this is a spring festival. Before telling you the situation of Vietnam, may I send you, and all our comrades, my warmest greetings. Collusion between the aggressors. Let us review Vietnam's situation in 1951. After their defeat in the China-Vietnam border campaign in October 1950, the greatest reverse they had ever suffered in the whole history of their colonial wars, which involved for them the loss of 5 provinces at one time: Cao Bang, Lang Son, Lao Cat, Tai Nguyen, and Hoa Binh. the French colonialists began the year 1951 with the dispatch of General de Lattre de Tassigny to Vietnam. They resorted to total war. Their maneuver was to consolidate the Bao Dai puppet government, organize puppet troops, and redouble spying activities. They set up no man's lands of from 5 to 10 kilometers wide around areas under their control and strengthened the Red River Delta by a network of 2,300 bunkers. They stepped up mopping up operations in our rear, applied the policy of annihilation and wholesale destruction of our manpower and potential resources by killing our compatriots, devastating our countryside, burning our rice fields, etc. In a word, they followed the policy of, quote, using Vietnamese to fight Vietnamese and nursing the war by means of warfare. Quick comment there. What is total war? I mean, it pretty much like the name says, is war with no holds barred, in which any kind of atrocity or violence is perpetrated, no matter who the target is. It is on orders, and with the assistance of their masters, the American interventionists, that the French colonialists performed the above-mentioned deeds. Among the first Americans now living in Vietnam, of course in areas under French control, there are a fairly noted spy, Donald Heath, ambassador accredited to the puppet government, and a general, head of the U.S. military mission. In September 1951, de Lattre de Tassigny went to Washington to make his report and beg for aid. In October, General Collins, Chief of Staff of the U.S. Army, came to Vietnam to inspect the French Expeditionary Corps and puppet troops. In order to show their American masters that U.S. aid is used in a worthwhile manner at present as well as in the future, in November, de Lattre de Tassigny attacked the chief town of Hoa Binh province. The result of this shooting offensive, which the reactionary press in France and in the world commented on uproariously, was that the Vietnam People's Army held the overwhelming majority of enemy troops tightly between two prongs and annihilated them. But this did not prevent de Lattre de Tassigny and his henchmen from hullabalooing that they had carried the day. At the very beginning of the war, the Americans supplied France with money and armaments. To take an example, 85% of weapons, war materials, and even canned food captured by our troops were labeled Made in USA. This aid had been stepped up all the more rapidly since June 1950, when the USA began interfering in Korea. American aid to the French invaders consisted in airplanes, boats, trucks, military outfits, napalm bombs, etc. Meanwhile, the Americans compelled the French colonialists to step up the organization of 4 divisions of puppet troops, with each party footing half the bill. Of course, this collusion between the French and American aggressors and the puppet clique was fraught with contradictions and contentions. The French colonialists are now landed in a dilemma. Either they receive U.S. aid and be then replaced by their American, quote, allies, or they receive nothing and be then defeated by the Vietnamese people. To organize the puppet army by means of press-ganging the youth in areas under their control would be tantamount to swallowing a bomb when one is hungry. A day will come when at last the bomb bursts inside. However, not to organize the army on this basis would mean instantaneous death for the enemy, because even the French strategists have to admit that the French Expeditionary Corps grows thinner and thinner and is on the verge of collapse. Furthermore, U.S. aid is paid for at a very high price. In the enemy-held areas, French capitalism is swept aside by American capitalism. American concerns like the Petroleum Oil Corporation, the Caltrex Oil Corporation, the Bethlehem Steel Corporation, the Florida Phosphate Corporation, and others monopolize rubber, ores, and other natural resources of our country. U.S. goods swamp the market. The French reactionary press, especially Le Monde, is compelled to acknowledge sadly that French capitalism is now giving way to U.S. capitalism. The U.S. interventionists have nurtured the French aggressors and the Vietnamese puppets, but the Vietnamese people do not let anybody delude and enslave them. People's China is our close neighbor. Her brilliant example gives us a great impetus. Not long ago, the Chinese people defeated the U.S. imperialists and won an historical victory. The execrated Chiang Kai-shek was swept from the Chinese mainland, though he is more cunning than the placeman Bao Dai. Can the U.S. interventionists, who were drummed out of China and are now suffering heavy defeats in Korea, conquer Vietnam? Of course not. Atrocious crimes of the U.S. interventionists. Defeated on the battlefield, the French colonialists retaliated upon unarmed people and committed abominable crimes. Hereunder are a few examples. As everywhere in the enemy-controlled areas, on October 15, 1951 at Ha Dong, the French soldiers raided the youths even in the streets and press-ganged them into the puppet army. And there, as everywhere, the people protested against such acts. 3 young girls stood in a line across the street in front of the trucks packed with the captured youngsters to prevent them from being sent to concentration camps. These courageous acts were worthy of heroine Raymond Diennes. The French colonialists revved the engines, and in a split second, our 3 young patriots were run over. There's a footnote there on Raymond Diennes, a French patriot and member of the French Communist Party. On February 13, 1950, she lay across a railway track to prevent the movement of a train carrying armaments and tanks for the French colonialists to fight the Vietnamese people in Indochina. She was sentenced by a French reactionary court to 1 year imprisonment, but owing to pressure by public opinion and the struggle waged by the masses, the French government was compelled to release her in November 1950 before her sentence expired. Back to the main text. In October 1951, the invaders staged a large-scale raid in Tay Bin province. They captured more than 16,000 people, most of whom were old people, women and children, and penned them in a football field surrounded by barbed wire and guarded by soldiers and dogs. For 4 days, the captives were exposed in the sun and the rain, ankle-deep in mud. They received no food and no drinking water. Over 300 of them died of exhaustion and disease. The relatives and friends who brought food to the captives were roughly manhandled, and the food was thrown into the mud and trampled underfoot. Mr. Fock, a surgeon of 70, who tried to save the victims' lives, was shot dead on the spot, as also were a number of pregnant women. Incensed by these barbarous acts, the townsfolk staged a strike and sought ways and means to help the internees. The determination of the population compelled the French colonialists to let the food in, but on order of Colonel Charton of the French Expeditionary Corps, it was declared a donation from the USA. On October 28, 1951, Lee Van Lam, 27, from Ha Khoi, a puppet soldier who had been saved from drowning by an old fisherman at Do San, said after he had come to, on October 27, the French embarked me as well as 100 other wounded men on board a steamer, saying they would send us to Saigon for medical attention. In the night, when the ship was in the offing, they threw us one by one into the water. Fortunately, I managed to snatch at a piece of floating wood and swam landward. I was unconscious when I was saved. Hereunder is the confession of Chaubert, a French captain captured at Tu Quai on November 25, 1951. Quote, "The French High Command gave us an order to destroy everything in order to transform this region into a desert," he said. Quote, "This order was observed to the letter. Houses were burnt down, animals and poultry were killed, havoc was wrought to gardens and plants and trees hewn down, rice fields and crops were set afire. Many days on end, black smoke covered the sky, and there was not a single soul alive except the French soldiers. The conflagration lasted until November 25, when the Vietnam People's Army unexpectedly attacked and annihilated our unit." Unquote. So, quick comment there. What ended those practices? The Vietnam People's Army attacking. Without that, how long would this have gone on? The examples quoted above can be counted by the thousands and are sufficient proof to substantiate the essence of the French colonialists and U.S. interventionists' quote-unquote civilization. And commenting again, this is of course 1952. This is well before a lot of the, these atrocities continued, is what I'm trying to say. When the U.S. got involved, they continued these exact practices and worse. And, this is the U.S. I don't know what else to say. Achievements recorded by the Democratic Republic of Vietnam. In 1951, the Vietnamese people made a big stride forward. In the political field, the founding of the Vietnam Workers' Party, the amalgamation of the Viet Minh and the Lien Viet, the setting up of the Committee of Action for Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos, greatly consolidated the unity and enhanced the confidence of the Vietnamese people. They strengthened the alliance between the 3 brother countries in their struggle against the common enemies, the French colonialists and U.S. interventionists. in order to realize their common goal, i.e., national independence. So we were able to frustrate the enemy's policy of divide and rule. In the economic field, the National Bank of Vietnam has been established, our finance is placed under centralized and unified supervision, and communications have been reorganized. Formerly, we demolished roads to check the enemy's advance. At present, we repair them to drive the enemy to an early defeat. Formerly, we did our utmost to sabotage roads. Now we encounter great difficulties in mending them, but have managed to complete our work quite rapidly. This is a hard job, especially when we lack machines. However, thanks to the enthusiasm and sacrificing spirit of our people, this work was carried through. To avoid enemy air raids, it was done at night by workers even knee-deep in water. In the bright torchlight, hundreds of men, women, and young people dug the earth to fill the gaps in the roads, broke stones, felled trees, and built bridges. As in any other work, here the workers' enthusiasm was roused by emulation drives. I am sure that you would be astonished to see teams of old volunteers from 60 to 80 years competing with teams of young workers. Here it must be pointed out that in the free zone, most of the work is done at night. Children go to school, housewives go to market, and guerrillas go to attack the enemy. Great successes have been achieved in the elaboration of the agricultural tax. Formerly, the peasants were compelled to pay taxes of various kinds and make many other contributions. Nowadays, they only have to pay a uniform tax in kind. Households whose production does not exceed 60 kilograms of paddy per year are exempt from tax. Households who harvest greater quantities have to pay a graduated tax. Generally speaking, the taxes to be paid do not exceed 20% of the total value of the annual production. To collect taxes in time, the party, National United Front, and the government have mobilized a great number of cadres to examine the new tax from the political and technical points of view. After their study, these cadres go to the countryside and hold talks and meetings to exchange views with the peasants and explain to them the new taxation policy. After this preparatory period, the peasants of both sexes appoint a committee composed of representatives of the administration and various people's organizations, whose duty it is to estimate the production of each household and fix the rate to be paid after approval by a congress in which all the peasants take part. This reform was welcomed by the population, who enthusiastically took part in this tax collection. Agricultural tax has been established simultaneously with the movement for increased production. At present, the government possesses adequate stocks of foodstuffs to cater for the soldiers and workers. So we have thwarted the enemy's cunning plot of blockading us to reduce us to starvation. As far as mass education is concerned, in 1951 we scored worthwhile results. Though great difficulties were created by the war, such as frequent changes of school site, schooling at nighttime, lack of school requisites, the number of schools rose from 2,712 in 1950 to 3,591 in 1951, with an attendance of 293,256 and 411,038 pupils, respectively. In South Vietnam, the situation is all the more ticklish. There, the free zones exist everywhere, but they aren't safe. Children go to their classrooms. In fact, there are only single classrooms and not schools in the strict meaning of this word, with the same vigilance as their fathers and brothers display in guerrilla fighting. Despite that, at present there are in South Vietnam 3,332 classrooms attended by 111,700 pupils. The liquidation of illiteracy is actively undertaken. In the first half of 1951, there were in Zone 3, Zone 5, and Viet Bach Zone 324,000 people who were freed from illiteracy and 350,000 others who began learning. During the same period, illiteracy was wiped out in 53 villages and 3 districts. One district is composed of from 5 to 10 villages. People's organizations opened 837 classes, attended by 9,800 public employees. The party, National United Front, government, the General Confederation of Labor, and the Army have periodically opened short-term political training courses, about 1 week. In short, great efforts are being made in mass education. Development and strengthening of international relations. In 1951, the relations between the Vietnamese people and foreign countries were developed and strengthened. For the first time in 1951, various delegations of the Vietnamese people visited Great People's China and heroic Korea. Through these visits, the age-old friendship between our three countries has been strengthened. The delegation of the Vietnamese youth to the Youth Festival in Berlin, the delegation of the Vietnam General Confederation of Labor to the Congress of the World Federation of Trade Unions in Warsaw, and the delegation to the World Peace Conference in Vienna have returned to Vietnam, filled with confidence and enthusiasm. At various meetings and in the press, members of these delegations told the Vietnamese people the tremendous progress they had witnessed in the people's democracies and the warm friendship shown by the brother countries to the Vietnamese people who were struggling for national independence and freedom. Those of the delegates who had the chance of visiting the Soviet Union are overjoyed because they can tell us of the great triumph of socialism and the ever-growing happiness enjoyed by the Soviet people. Upon returning from the Youth Festival, Trong Thi-Shin, a young woman worker, said, "The youth in the Soviet Union received us most affectionately during our stay in their great country." The talks held by these delegates are living lessons most useful for the inculcation of internationalism. Peace in Vietnam, withdraw foreign troops from Vietnam, were the claims formulated in a resolution passed by the plenary session of the World Peace Council held in Vienna, claims which have given great enthusiasm to the Vietnamese people. The interventionists suffered defeat after defeat. Last year was a year of brilliant victories for our People's Army, and a year of heavy defeats and losses in men and material for the invaders. According to incomplete figures, and excluding the China-Vietnam border campaign in October 1950, during which the French army lost more than 7,000 men, annihilated and captured. In 1951, the enemy lost 37,700 officers and men, POWs included. He will never forget the VinhIen PhuocIen campaign, North Vietnam, in January last year, during which he received a deadly blow from the Vietnam People's Army. He will not forget the strategic points of Quang Yen, road number 18, Ninh Binh, Phu Ly, and Nha Lo in North Vietnam, where our valiant fighters crushed him to pieces in March, May, June, and September. But the most striking battle was waged in December in the Hoa Binh region, which left the enemy no more than 8,000 men alive. Our heroic militiamen and guerrillas who operate in the north, center, and south of Vietnam have caused heavy losses to the enemy. From the outbreak of the war of aggression unleashed by the French, their expeditionary corps has lost 170,000 men in killed, wounded, and captured, while the Vietnamese regular army and guerrilla units have grown stronger and stronger. Guerrilla warfare is now being intensified and expanded in the enemy-controlled areas, especially in the Red River Delta. Our guerrillas are particularly active in the provinces of Bac Giang, Bac Ninh, Ha Nam, Ninh Binh, Ha Dong, Hung Yen, and Tai Binh. Hereunder are some facts. Early in October 1951, 14 enemy regiments carried out a large-scale raid in the districts of Doi An Ha, Hung Nan, and Tien Hung. From October 1 to October 4, our guerrillas waged violent battles. In 3 points, Cong Ho, An Mi, and An Binh, 500 French soldiers were annihilated. All these victories were due to the heroism of our soldiers and guerrillas and to the sacrifice of the entire Vietnamese people. In each campaign, tens of thousands of voluntary workers of both sexes helped the army men. As a rule, they worked in very hard conditions, in pelting rain, on muddy and steep mountain tracks, etc. Thousands of patriots have left the enemy-controlled areas to take part in the above-mentioned task. It is worth mentioning here that the youth have set up many shock units. The following example will illustrate the great patriotism and initiative of our people. In the Hoa Binh campaign, our army had to cross the Lo River. French troops were stationed along the right bank, while their boats continually patrolled the river. In these conditions, how could the crossing be made without the enemy noticing it? But the local population managed to find a way. In a locality some dozen kilometers from the Lo River, they called in a great number of craft and, through roundabout paths, carried them to the spot assigned at a scheduled time. As soon as our troops had crossed the river, the inhabitants carried their craft back so as to keep secrecy and avoid enemy air raids. Here I wish to speak of the women who sponsor the soldiers. Most of them are old peasants, many have grandchildren. They help our officers and men and nurse the wounded as if they were their own sons. Like goddesses protecting our lives, they take care of those of our fighters who work in enemy-controlled areas. Their deeds are highly esteemed and appreciated. As is said above, the French colonialists are compelled to set up puppet troops in order to offset the losses suffered by the French Expeditionary Corps, but this is a dangerous method for the enemy. First, everywhere in the enemy-held areas, the population struggles against the enemy raiding and coercing the youth into their army. Second, the people so mobilized have resorted to actions of sabotage. Take an example. Once, the quisling governor of Tonking, styling himself Elder of the Youth, paid a visit to the officers' training school of second degree at Nam Dinh. On hearing this news, the cadets prepared in his honor a dignified reception by writing on the school wall the slogans, "Down with Bao Dai," "Down with the puppet clique," while Bao Dai's name was given to the lavatory. During this visit, the cadets made so much noise that the governor was unable to speak. They put to him such a question as, "Dear Elder, why do you want to use us as cannon fodder for the French colonialists?" A group of cadets contemplated giving him a thrashing, but he managed to take French leave like a piteous dog. Many units of the puppet army secretly sent letters to President Ho Chi Minh, saying that they were waiting for a propitious occasion to pass over to the side of the fatherland, and that they were ready to carry out any orders issued by the resistance, despite the danger they might encounter. Complete failure of the French colonialists. As soon as de Lattre de Tassigny set foot in Vietnam early in 1951, he boasted of the eventual victories of the French troops. After his defeat and disillusion at the beginning of 1952, he realized that he would soon meet with complete failure. The fate of the French colonialists' policy brought misgivings to the most reactionary circles in France. In the paper Information, issued on October 22, 1951, Daladier, one of the criminals in the Munich affair, wrote, quote, "Delving into the real reason of our desperate financial situation, we shall see that one of the underlying causes was the lack of ripe consideration of our policy over Indochina. In 1951, an expenditure of as much as 330 billion francs was officially reserved for the Indochinese budget. Due to the constant rise in the prices of commodities and increase in the establishments of the French Expeditionary Corps, which number 180,000 at present, it should be expected that in 1952, this expenditure will increase by 100 billion francs. We have the impression that the war in Indochina has caused exceedingly grave danger to our financial as well as our military situation. It is impossible to foresee a rapid victory in a war which has lasted 5 years and is in many ways reminiscent of the war unleashed by Napoleon against Spain and the expedition against Mexico during the Second Empire." And there are several footnotes off of that. So first, Daladier, born in 1884, was chairman of the French Radical Socialist Party, premier of the French government in 1933 and 34, and from 1938 to 1940. In September 1938, he attended the Munich Conference, and his surrender to Hitler paved the way for the attack and occupation of France by the German fascists. Also, in 1808, Napoleon Bonaparte sent an expedition against Spain and was routed by the Spanish people. This campaign ended in 1812 in favor of the Spaniards. Lastly, in 1861, France, of Napoleon III, Great Britain, and Spain waged a coalition war against Mexico. In this campaign, France also suffered a pitiful defeat. Back to the main text. In its issue of December 13, 1951, the paper Intransigent wrote, quote, "France is paralyzed by the war in Indochina. We have gradually lost the initiative of operation because our main forces are now pinned down in the plains of North Vietnam. In 1951, 330 billion francs were earmarked for the military budget of Indochina, while according to the official figures, our expenditure amounted to over 350 billion. A credit of 380 billion francs will be allotted to the 1952 budget, but in all probability, the mark of 500 billion will be reached. Such is the truth. Whenever France tried to take some action, well, she immediately realized that she was paralyzed by the war in Indochina." Unquote. In its issue of December 16, 1951, Franck Tireur wrote, quote, "General Vaunoyen Giap's battalions, which are said to have been annihilated and to have a shattered morale, are now launching counteroffensives in the Hanoi region. It is more and more obvious that the policy we have followed up to the present time has failed. Today, it's clear that it is met with complete failure." Unquote. Hereunder is an excerpt from a letter sent to his colleagues by Captain Gazignoff of the French Expeditionary Corps, captured by us on January 7, 1952, in the Hoa Binh battle. Quote, "Taken prisoner a few days ago, I am very astonished at the kind and correct attitude of the Vietnam People's Army's men toward me. The Vietnamese troops will certainly win final victory because they struggle for a noble ideal, a common cause, and are swayed by a self-imposed discipline. It is as clear as daylight that the Vietnam People's Army will crush the French Expeditionary Corps, but it is ready to receive any of us who will pass over to its side. French officers, non-commissioned officers, and men who want to go over to the Vietnam People's Army will be considered as friends and will be set free." Unquote. The Vietnamese people will win. In 1952, Vietnam will embark on a program which includes the following points. 1. To buckle down to production work and consolidate the national economy. 2. To struggle and annihilate the enemy's forces, to intensify guerrilla warfare. 3. To expose by all means the enemy's policy of using the Vietnamese to fight the Vietnamese and nursing the war by means of warfare. 4. To closely link patriotism to internationalism. 5. Energetically to combat bureaucracy, corruption, and waste. The patriotism and heroism of the Vietnamese people allow us to have firm confidence in final victory. The Vietnamese people's future is as bright as the sun in spring. Overjoyed at the radiance of the sun in spring, we shall struggle for the splendid future of Vietnam, for the future of democracy, world peace, and socialism. We triumph at the present time, we shall triumph in the future, because our path is enlightened by the great Marxist-Leninist doctrine. That's the end of the audiobook. So what do you think? Leave a comment below. I don't have too many additional comments on this. I think it's fairly self-explanatory and very lucid. I guess the only thing I would highlight again is just, my introductory comments about the U.S. taking over for the other imperialists, including their, quote, enemies, the Nazis. What we see is more continuity than change, I guess is the point there, in terms of the atrocities perpetrated against the colonized or dependent or developing countries of the, quote, third world. The violence and just degradation is just mind-blowing. It's just to a really extreme extent. And that didn't really change no matter, which country of the imperialist West was doing it. All right, I'll leave it there. Thanks for listening. Thanks to the current patrons whose names are on the screen. If you'd like to get your name on the screen, head to patreon.com/socialismforall. You can sign up for as little as $2 a month. Every donation is encouraging. They're also materially helpful, so thank you very much for those. If you'd like to help out without making a donation, liking, sharing, subscribing, and leaving a comment, even if it's just good video, really helps. Boosting the channel, and particularly with the sharing, getting it in front of more people, expanding the audience, expanding the conversation. Ultimately, whatever you do to advance the cause of socialism, thank you for doing it, whether it has anything to do with S4A or not. We need this thing to happen. That's why I'm doing this. So, in that spirit, join an organization if there's a good one in your area. This is educational work and agitation work, but ultimately we need organization, which, that's not necessarily going to happen through a YouTube channel. Or, start your own project if there's something you've been thinking of doing and you have some comrades to help you out. In any case, thanks again, and we will catch you in the next video.